So let's come on to Harry Kane then, Jack and David in particular. I mean, you've put in your column, David, no active dialogue currently between City and Tottenham. There are lots of conflicting reports. I heard Sam Lee on the radio, our Athletic City correspondent yesterday, saying, it all depends who your contacts are, what your contacts are saying, and what they want you to believe in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's very useful for us to explain this to the listeners, that all of us speak to different people, in some cases the same people. We sort of triangulate our information, try and decipher who's telling the truth, who might not be, whether it's somewhere in between, or whether there's a bit of truth in all of it. And I think that's probably the case in this situation. You're referring to the Monday column. That item is written by Charlie Eccleshare, our Tottenham correspondent, who understands that Harry Kane is yet to be reintegrated fully into training, and therefore it wasn't a great surprise that he wasn't involved. I was hearing whispers that they were hoping to get him on the bench, but since it seems that no one realistically thought he would be involved. There is, I don't know if the word is hope or plan or will on Harry Kane's part to be available for the European game on Thursday or the Wolves game on Sunday. But then let's talk about the City situation specifically. My information tallies with that which Charlie mentioned in the column, that there are no active talks between the clubs right now. I don't think Tottenham are prepared to engage. If Manchester City are to force the issue with a price that might bring Tottenham to the table, then this situation might change. I've been quite clear in saying that I think Manchester City are prepared to pay around £100 million sort of fixed, and then they might go a bit higher with some add-ons like 20, 25, 30 million. But it's not going to get, as things stand, to where it's reported Tottenham want it to be of 150, 160 million pounds. But Daniel Levy has never actually said that. It's what we've kind of interpreted. He could just decide Harry Kane's not for sale. There's no break clause, which is another issue altogether, very different to the Jack Grealish situation. It brings us back to the Harry Kane contract that was negotiated largely by his family in 2018, 6-year deal. So that's that part of the situation. However, we do know this can change at any moment. And that's why Sam is hearing things from City, people optimistic that he'll be coming in. Some people think that he will be coming in, and we can only report what we're being told. And then there's the Harry Kane factor as well. Does it get to the stage now? And I think it does, from speaking to people in football, where it's his job to unlock this move. He goes to Daniel Levy and says, please engage with Manchester City. And then that gets back to Manchester City, who then come to the table. Is Kane prepared to do that? How forceful is he, especially without a so-called big agent, when he's relying on his family to do so, which could get quite emotional? And will Daniel Levy budge? He's a businessman. He's hard-nosed. He'll be excited by yesterday's result, which will give him hopes of top 4. If Harry Kane's part of that, maybe it's going to be a beautiful season in Daniel Levy's mind, and that the money would not suffice. But of course, it's going to play out over the next couple of weeks in a fairly dramatic way.
Jack?
I still think he's likelier to stay than to go. I think City have not yet given Daniel Levy anything to really think about. It's an interesting question as to why that is the case. Like, if City generally are not reluctant to pay up if they especially want to play, they paid the £100 million for Grealish pretty quickly. But clearly with Kane, they're dragging their heels a bit. They are maybe waiting to see what happens in terms of Kane's relationship with Tottenham. And maybe City will come back this week with a bigger bid, bigger than the 75 plus 25, which I believe is as much as they've offered so far. But as it stands, I told this morning that Daniel Levy is still adamant that Kane's not going anywhere. Spurs are waiting to see what City are going to say, if anything, this week. But frankly, at the moment, I still expect him to stay at Tottenham at the end of the transfer window, regardless of what he might want.
What's probably doesn't do many parties favours in all of this, Adam, is that there's no actual race to sign Harry Kane, is there? If you go back to, say, one of the big transfers of the last couple of 2 or 3 years, the Harry Maguire transfer. That was seen as a race between United and City to try and get Harry Maguire. But you look at all the places at the start of the summer that might have been thrown into who could have gone for him, United being one of them, Paris Saint-Germain being another, and Chelsea being another, that none of them are even looking at him for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. I think one of the most fascinating things about this transfer window is we've not seen this with any players. There's not been a race to sign, Jadon Sancho, Romelu Lukaku, Jack Grealish, Ben White. That there hasn't been a real sort of one club bids, another club comes in with a counter bid, an auction develops that rushes a move along. It's almost like there's been some sort of unspoken agreement between top clubs that, we'll get him and we'll get him. Even Messi. I mean, no one else was going for Messi.
Varane as well. I mean,
right?
Yeah.
So it's a really strange thing this summer. And Kane, I mean, I think it's a move that he needs more than any of the other parties involved, because you look next summer and a number of different attacking players become more available, whether that's Mbappe and Haaland, and we've been through that before. Maybe Lewandowski becomes even more available than he was suggested to be this summer. So different things become available. Harry Kane becomes 29. People already think he's not that fast anyway. Is he then worth what, and his contract isn't that much further along. He's still tied in for a couple more years. So it's a move that Harry Kane really, he is the most interested party, I think, in this move. And I thought it was a really curious thing that both Tottenham and City did, that was allow this to go beyond yesterday's game. Because if I'm City, there's a big risk factor to playing that game without a proper centre forward on our books. Because if that game goes wrong, all of a sudden everyone's now looking at Man City thinking they've not scored in the Champions League final, they've not scored on their opening day of the season, they have a problem. So not only are they a really rich club with resources that need a striker, they're also a team that can't score goals. And now, they're a bit more desperate. And if I'm Daniel Levy, I'm thinking, well, they need him a bit more now. So let's put that price tag even further up than it was 48 hours ago. It's a really odd situation, and it's going to take, as David says, Man City. The only way this is forced is by Man City producing the money.
Well, Manchester City could easily win the title with the squad that they have got. I mean, they having added Jack Grealish to a title-winning squad, I know they've lost Aguero, and you wondered, David and Jack and David, you go first, whether City just sit there and go, we'll play the long game here, because as Adam says, players are going to become available next summer who are younger and will probably provide better value for money in the long run.
Yeah, I'm never going to write Pep off when we've seen what he's done in the past. And I think, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, that City were quite a bit off the pace. Was it last season? Early on? And they turned it around to handsomely win the title. I don't know of any alternatives to Kane. Perhaps it's just me lacking in information. I reported, I think, in early February that Romelu Lukaku was high on their list of candidates for the number 9 role. Danny Ings had been in and amongst the list if they were going to bring in even 2 attackers. But Harry Kane emerged, especially after the Erling Haaland pursuit was put to one side for at least a year. And given the time left in the transfer window, I'm inclined to think that unless they, pull out all the stops to go for a Vlahovic, who many are interested in, for a Lautaro Martinez or somebody else, then perhaps they will go with what they've got. We've seen that they can make the most of a range of strikers, as Pep calls them, and we could look very silly if we write them off and they go and win the next 10 games in a row, and it wouldn't surprise you. I do think in the absence of Kane, it's looking like a summer 2022 move for somebody like Haaland if Real Madrid don't get him. I think City have a bit of confidence that if Real Madrid don't get him, they stand a really good chance. But that's a big if. And of course, as you say, there'll be other strikers on the market.
And I think one of the issues with this whole story really is clearly Guardiola likes Kane, but I'm not sure City as a club need Kane enough, or they want Kane quite enough to get the deal done. You know, if Kane was the number one priority and they'd been desperate for him all season, then maybe they would have paid the money to get him in. But as it stands, you know, the fact is City won the Premier League and reached a Champions League final last season without a proper striker. They did it with Kevin De Bruyne up front, basically. Aguero barely played. Jesus didn't do much. So I don't think City absolutely need him. And certainly don't think they need him to the extent that they would pay, let's say, 150 million up front, which is what it would take.
Can I just go back to one of the points I made on Kane potentially needing to force this move now? I think it will have been relayed to Kane by whoever that this is your summer. You know, you're going to be 29 in a year's time. You might not have the chance to move to a Manchester City. Others might not want to sign you at that age. Equally, they might. Hypothetical. So do you think, Jack, from what you know, Adam, that he will have the courage, the ability to force this through to the player to essentially bring clubs together, or do you think that's going to be a losing battle?
I don't see which other cards Kane has left to play. You know, he's gone fairly public with his interview with Gary Neville just before the Euros. He's come back late for training at the start of this season. He had a lengthy meeting with Paratici last week at which he repeatedly told him that he wanted to go. Like, what more can he do? He could, you know, I don't actually see what options Kane has to force it. He's already played, I think, his whole hand pretty much, and it's not got him anywhere. And I do think a lot of this comes down, and this is something that David has said in his column, and which I think is really relevant here, which is I don't know if there's quite enough political clout on the Kane side to get it over the line. And that's one of the many reasons why I'm still of the view that I think he'll end up staying.
The Premier League is back, and The Athletic is home to the biggest football podcast network in the world. My podcast with Mark Chapman is becoming The Athletic Football Podcast, and there'll be 3 shows a week on that feed. Then there's the usual Totally Football show with James Richardson, Raphael Honigstein, James Horncastle, and the gang. We also have a range of dedicated club shows featuring the likes of James Pearce, Amy Lawrence, and Phil Hay. Check them out for all the latest transfer news and updates from your team. Michael Cox and Tom Warville will showcase their unrivaled analytics knowledge on the Athletic Tactics podcast, while Adam Hurrey's hilarious football cliches is now going twice a week. You've got all things WSL on the Athletic Women's Football podcast. Take your fantasy football team to a new level with the Athletic FPL podcast, and go further down the English pyramid with the Totally Football League show. So buckle up, as we've got big plans for the new season. Listen to all our shows for free in all the usual places, and ad-free when you subscribe to The Athletic.